I'm back now after having done the 3-peak challenge for the Mind charity. You may have seen some of the videos that I posted up online that gave a brief glimpse into what I did, but it didn't give you the full story. So I thought I'd create a little video that did. For those of you who don't already know what the 3-peak challenge actually is, as the name suggests, it involves climbing the 3 tallest peaks in the UK. So that's Ben Nevis in Scotland, Scafell PIke in England, and Mount Snowdon in Wales. In total, that's over 10,000 feet, and you have to do the challenge within just 24 hours. On the Friday, I went and picked up my good friend Cecile, and we drove from London up to Nottingham, which was the central location for the challenge. The following day, we woke up bright and early at 5 o'clock, got into one of the 2 buses that had been laid on for us. We made excellent time getting up to Scotland across the border. Clarky, our bus driver, must have made up probably about an hour on the journey from what the sat-nav actually predicted for us. We made it across the border into Scotland and arrived at the base camp of Ben Nevis. Everybody was really eager to get underway with the challenge, and we set off and made our way. It may sound really strange to say it, but the first 30 minutes of the challenge were probably the toughest. I must admit that I really did doubt myself when I first started. My legs were sore and I was tired, and the prospect of actually doing a 24-hour challenge seemed just far too much. Luckily, I acclimatised, and once I did, the scenery that surrounded us was incredible. Really, really beautiful. One of the highlights for that particular trip was about a third of the way up the mountain we encountered some other hikers. Unbelievably, they had actually carried up an entire beer keg and set up a bar. About halfway up the mountain we started to encounter snow. At first this was quite a novelty, as I'm not really used to much snow living down in London. But as this became thicker and the icy winds started to set in, it became more of a challenge. Anyway, we persevered and continued on our way to the top, eventually reaching the top. To joyous celebrations, we high-fived one another and patted each other on the back, took out our camera phones and took the obligatory selfies, and after about 10 minutes we decided to make our way and descend the mountain. At this time, I think it was around sort of 4 or 5 o'clock, we actually managed to capture the golden hour, which is a fantastic time of day where everything turns golden as it just moves into sunset. So we got back onto the bus. Spirits were great and we were all pretty happy. We made our way back down to England on the second leg of the journey to Scafell. Before I took on the challenge, Scafell was actually the one mountain that worried me the most. I'd actually climbed Scafell a few years ago, so I knew the risks involved. I knew how steep it was, how rocky it was, and how badly laid out it was. We got to Scafell about 1 o'clock in the morning. We were all a little bit groggy and a bit sore from the hike up Ben Nevis. We started our ascent and we got off to one of the worst possible starts when one of the group's water bottles actually burst. We made it to the top after what seemed like an eternity. Quite depressingly, we quickly realised that this was only halfway to completing the challenge. Either way, we got out our phones and celebrated by taking selfies and photos of one another. Unfortunately, the lack of sunlight and icy winds made it extremely cold, and unbeknown to us, our mobile phones, which we had been using to navigate, actually froze. Because our mobile phones had malfunctioned, it took us completely off route. It wasn't until the rocks started getting bigger and the incline started getting steeper that we realised that we had made a mistake. We reset our phones and managed to get GPS signal back. Unfortunately, every path that tried to take us back ended in a dead end or a cliff face, so we kept on having to track back upon our original path. Thankfully, we managed to find our way back to the main path, and we were so relieved. Things became easier and the descent was relatively quick. So we headed west on to our last peak, which was Mount Snowdon in Wales. Mount Snowdon was actually another peak that I had climbed a few years prior to this, so I thought before I arrived there that I knew the route and knew roughly what to expect. So we all got ready before we arrived, and jumped out of the bus and proceeded to run up the mountain. This, as it turned out, would be my own undoing. In my haste, I ran straight past the first signpost and took the wrong route. Anyone who's gone up Mount Snowdon will know that there is a little bit of bouldering that you start off with. So on this route, which was the wrong route, there was a bit of bouldering. But for some reason, it seemed to get harder and harder. Now every time I climbed up a little bit, I would get back to a path which looked like a normal path. But it wasn't until about 30 minutes in that I realised that the path seemed to disappear and there were a distinct lack of people around me. Luckily, I encountered some other hikers who had decided to take this route. I asked them where I actually was and whether or not I had strayed from the main path. They unfortunately told me that I had gone up the hardest route, which was Goch. Anyway, we made it up to the top, and to my utter dismay, the ridge stood in front of me. The ridge is ridiculous. It seems to go on forever, and it's made up of loose rock with sheer cliff face on either side. I honestly thought about trying to go back, but the cliff face was ridiculous. It was pretty much a sheer drop. I made the decision to continue and do the ridge walk. The ridge was terrifying, one of the scariest things that I've ever done. Thankfully, the ridge subsided and took us back onto the original path. I didn't even bother looking at the time and continued going up Mount Snowdon. I reached the peak, I turned round and just made my descent back down to the bus. I managed to jog a little bit, but only as much as my legs would allow me. When I got back to the bus, I jumped in, collapsed on the seat, and closed my eyes, relieved that the entire ordeal was finished. It took me probably about 20 minutes to compose myself. Thankfully, I had a beer to help me with that before I actually looked at the times that we had set. Amazingly, 3 of us actually had made it within the 24 hours, and I'm pleased to say that I also made it, but only by the skin of my teeth. So that was the challenge completed. What do I have in terms of words of advice? Well, don't be a fool like me and run off on your own. Take the time, look to see where you're going. It is so easy to take the wrong route. Thank you to everyone who sponsored or offered words of encouragement for the 3 Peak Challenge. If you haven't already done so, the links to sponsor me are still in the description, and it's still not too late. So until the next challenge, bye! How do you end one of these videos? Until the next time, bye! See ya! Peace out. Oh, I don't know. Until the next time, bye. Are you still watching?